Welcome to the BARC 1992 Production Car Championship. And what is production cars, we hear you say? They are these, cars from the showrooms that you can go in and purchase any day of the week. Cars that are less than 3 years old in their production model. And coming up on the grid, you see the classes. There are 3 classes for production cars. Class A, which is really over 2 litres and above. Class B, which is up to 2 litres from the 1400 range. And Class C, which is the small sports saloon class. Now then, what cars compete in these classes? In Class A, we often see the BMW, the Saabs, the Saab Turbo, the Sierra Cosworth, the Sapphire Cosworth, BMW M3, Porsche 944, Porsche 911 and Mercedes-Benz 190. But any car can be allowed in. They take the weight into consideration and its power output and then classify it in that class. Class B, what do we see in there? We can see some Fiat Tipo 16 valves, Volkswagen Golf GTIs 1.9 16 valves, Vauxhall Astras, Honda Civics, the Honda Civic VTEC, very competitive car, and a new car in the class for this year is the RS 2000 16 valve. Class C, that's called the sports saloons. That's the baby hatchback, the one that the wife has to go shopping and take the kids to school usually. And we can see in this class the Ford Fiesta XR2, Suzuki Swift GTIs, Peugeot 205 GTI will be allowed in, but the 1.6 version. And also there could be Vauxhall Novas and Austin Metros, etc. Modifications that are permitted. On the performance side, they are allowed to change the shock absorbers on the car, as long as they fit in the original existing locations. On the safety side, they have to put in a roll cage that covers the front and the rear car, as is shown here with Christian Van in his first race. They have to have a safety seat, a 6-point harness and a fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher must fire into the driver's cockpit and into the engine area. Now these cars all have to compete on Firestone Firehawk Production Saloon Car tyres, the cars that you can go into any garage and buy. That makes the competition equal on the tyre side, equal on the shock absorber side, so it comes down to the driver's performance. And if some models are seen to have an unfair advantage, then they are penalised by having to carry extra weight. Some cars are penalised by the loose nut behind the steering wheel, as we see here with George Agerton. And we will see a lot more as the season progresses. The season begins in the spring and goes throughout 8 months and ends in the autumn. It goes through the north, south, east and west of the country, visiting many circuits. This is Silverstone. Silverstone is situated in the middle of the country near Northampton. And the first race of the season will fall to Mark Dan in the Sapphire Cosworth, who's hounded by Frank Cundell as the checkered flag is waved for the end of the race. And it's not the driver at the front who wins most points. There are 3 classes and the points are awarded to the winner in each class, with another point for the fastest lap. Tony Lanfranchi won Class B and Danny Stillwell won Class C. The race at Silverstone was a 15-lap sprint race, but for about 3 races in the season we have a 1-hour endurance race, changing drivers halfway through. This is the first of the 3. We go to the Gower Peninsula where we find Pembrey Circuit, an ex-airfield like many of the other circuits from World War II. And at the start it's a long drag down to a first gear single file hairpin, but nobody told the Suzukis. They tried to go 3 abreast. And from John Mill's car we can see the Quinn brothers car taking out Rod Adlington. Danny Stillwell went wide and John Mill came through in 3rd. On the Class A cars, it's the Saab in front of a Sapphire Cosworth from a Porsche 911, a white Escort RS 2000, a red and yellow Astra 16 valve, a Sierra Cosworth hatch, a Porsche 944, the black one, then there's a silver Mercedes sliding wide out on the grass, a Fiat Tipo just coming up to their rear. In the Suzuki class, Tony Quinn had a new line through the hairpin, which he tried on about lap 3. I think he had the rain tyres on. Tim Busby, an ex-champion in the class, very over-exuberant at the hairpin, but still ahead of the field in Class C. 20 minutes are up and the first driver changes take place. The first driver gets out and he belts up the second driver. Shuts the doors and he's off back into the race again, still in the lead of Class B. But here comes Bill Stillwell. He's about to change over to his brother, who's still driving the Suzuki Swift in Class C, who hasn't come in yet. The The Saab has changed places. He's still in the lead. He had a healthy lead before he came into the pits and still maintains the lead overall in the race. Whereas the Sapphire Cosworth seems to have blown a head gasket and is retired to the left. The Marshals, they hold the cars up and will allow them out on the track when it's safe to do so. Unfortunately, the Porsche got held up, who was in second place in the race. Tony Quinn was happy with the way he took the hairpin on the first lap, has decided to try it again halfway through the race. Francine Bogg in the green Suzuki is seen here having a kiss from Danny Stillwell in the Fiat Tipo. This is Francine's first year in saloon car racing and seems to be coming under a lot of attention with her rear end from the male drivers. Danny Stillwell, not only did he like her at the hairpin, but seems to like her through the Benny Bends. Now we see Richard Wager in the Raceworks Sierra Cosworth, who decided that he'd fed up with the racing and has parked the car at the apex of the hairpin, leaving it there till the checkered flag comes out for the Saab to win, with the Mercedes second and the Porsche 911 Carrera third. The winner in Class B was the white Ford Escort RS2000 on a debut for the car. And Class C was won by Danny Stillwell and Bill Stillwell in the little Suzuki Swift from Southend. We then go up to Leicestershire, and this is Mallory Park. It's a very popular circuit with the drivers. It's not an airfield. It is actually a 1 mile loop with a hairpin at the top left-hand corner and a very, very big lake in the middle. It's very tight and very close racing, and the drivers do like it. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted, because the first corner is a long one and goes on for about a quarter of a mile and just keeps going and going and going. And as you see, Tony Lanfranchi, he's having a hectic time with the steering wheel, keeping it on an inside line. George doesn't. He goes to the outside and then comes straight back across the track, collecting Chris Lord in the Sapphire Cosworth and taking out the Furrows Ford Escort RS2000 that was the winner in the last race. Tony Lanfranchi here has got a tap from behind as he goes through the right-hander of the S's. The Saab is leading, followed by Mark Dan in the yellow and white Sapphire Cosworth, and then we have the Porsche 911, the red and yellow car, in third place. Leader of the small class is the green and white Suzuki Swift, ahead of Tony Lanfranchi, who's already been off, and some of the other cars, which was quite a bit of upset due to the incidents on the first lap. Let's have another look at it. Here's Chris Lord with all the sides stoved in, but it's not as bad as it actually looks. George Ageston, again, yes, he's got out to have a look at the car, but we're looking from George's car to see what happened. He goes wide to the left onto the grass, the car's gone sideways, and as he's got traction, he's come straight back across the track, hit Chris Lord's car, and off onto the inside, hitting the bank and sliding along it backwards. Let's have another look at the incident from Austin Metcalf's Class B Volkswagen Golf GTI. There's George coming across in the air as he collects Chris Lord, who spins, who touches Jim Smith in the Escort RS2000, and he has to spin as well. And if we look to the infield, we can see Tony Lanfranchi getting back onto the track in a bouncing Astra. Here we see Carol Miles in the Suzuki Swift as she's having a moment, left, right, and up into the gravel trap. And her race has ended because the wheel has come off. Popular Essex boy Danny Stillwell is leading Class C in the Suzuki Swift, whilst Tony Mould in his Suzuki Swift likes to kiss the Armco, just as much as he likes to kiss his wife nowadays. And up to the first gear hairpin, and Gaten Rumboats how it has a big moan as he locks all the brakes up on the Cosworth, and smoke pours from the tyres. Action always abounds at Mallory as we see Tony Quinn and Rod Adlington giving no quarter to one another through Gerrard's Bend. But it's Tony Quinn who gets the better of Rod as they go up to the hairpin. Lionel Abbott in the Saab, sponsored by Mobil Oils, comes through in the lead. But there's Mark Dan in second place, coming under a lot of pressure from the red and yellow Porsche 911 Carrera as they get amongst the tail enders. But the flag comes out for Lionel Abbott in the Saab for the second race on the trot, with Mark Dan just ahead of the Porsche in third place. Danny Stillwell, just coming through in the red, white and green Suzuki Swift, takes Class C honours, and Mike Devine took the Class B honours in the Volkswagen Golf GTI. For the fourth round of the championship, the circus moved south to the sunny Kent countryside in the rolling hills of Brands Hatch, a circuit which is certainly the favourite of most of the drivers. and is shown in the way they perform. They love the circuit, and the Porsche has gone straight into the lead from the Saab up to the hairpin called Druids. But a lot of drivers have problems at the hairpin, and looking from the headlight camera we can see a high-tech car with no tack on the tyres, and a Suzuki Swift joining the view as a Vauxhall Astra joins the fray. Up into clearways, a very dangerous left and right-hander. Before we meet the big right-hander, two cars have a heavy impact. Jim Smith in the Escort RS2000 and Gaten Rumboldt's Howitt in the Sierra Cosworth. A very heavy impact indeed, but it renders neither car immobile as Gaten returns to the pits with a no. He actually expected his mechanics to push the bonnet down, shut the boot and tape it together and get it back on the track, but they said the car was totally finished for the day. Back to the front, and it's the Porsche leading from the Saab, from a BMW. Then we have a Sierra red and white, then a black Sierra, then a Porsche, then a Sapphire Cosworth and a Mercedes. Before we come to the Class B leader, who's Tony Lanfranchi. Tony, an ex-instructor of Brands Hatch, knows the circuit very well, as he's been racing here for over 38 years. And the flag you may have seen in the top left-hand corner just now, Chris Osborne definitely didn't see. That's a red and yellow striped flag, and it denotes oil on the track, and you're likely to spin. That's why Chris has spun and gone onto the grass. The marshals actually do their best to try and warn the drivers of impending danger. That impending danger is often the drivers they're trying to warn. Anyway, here's Rod Adlington, who's actually got it together at Brands Hatch, and Chris Osborne, who hasn't. Up at the front, we have a Saab sandwich between a Porsche and a BMW. And they come up to Druids Hill Bend, and they want to make it a BMW sandwich. Frank Cundell trying to get between the Saab and the Porsche as he dives for the inside line and actually gets in front of it. Down Druids into Graham Hill. It's still the Porsche leading, but it's now Frank Cundell in the BMW M3 in second place, and they seem to be pulling away from the Saab Turbo. But Lionel Habit still hasn't given up. Up into clearways, Lionel sees a chance as they're coming upon the tail enders, the small sports saloons Class C cars, the Suzuki Swifts. And this is where the drivers of the Class A cars have to rely on the Class C drivers looking in their mirrors to see them coming upon them very quickly. The marshals try and warn them as well with a waved blue flag. But when one has overtaken them, you're not sure if there's another one all ready to come through, as Christian Van here lets the Saab through and then drops in behind him up into clearways, which unfortunately pushes Frank Cundell wide onto the grass and loses third place for him, which is enough for him to lose all chance of getting back on terms with the leaders. But there are some Class A cars who don't need a Class C car to get in the way for them to have trouble through clearways, as shown here by Mark Dan in the Benfield Motorsport Sapphire Cosworth, who can do it perfectly well all alone on his own. The other Benfield Motorsport car of Chris Lord was damaged at Mallory Park, if you remember, and now we see it back out a few weeks later, very well repaired. The Fiat Tipo of Bill Stillwell, a new car to the championship this year, is still having teething troubles, but should get them soon ironed out and be amongst the leaders of Class B, who in this case is actually Tony Lanfranchi in the Vauxhall Astra with the red and yellow checkered bonnet. Seen here putting Jim Whelan under pressure in a Class A car. Up at the front, the Porsche is still coming under pressure from Lionel Abbott, who dives for the inside of clearways as he gets through on the run-up to the flag. And we can see from the onboard camera of the Porsche 911 as we say bye-bye to the Saab in the distance, who must have been sandbagging it for the last few laps. As the Saab receives the checkered flag the third time this year, Paul Edwards gets out of the Porsche and goes to congratulate Lionel Abbott without the helmet and Frank Cundell with the helmet, showing it doesn't have to be a young man's sport to win. Now we go to Thruxton Circuit in Hampshire for the next round, where Paul Edwards, who's keen to get to the front, ungentlemanly persuades Mike Devine to move over, but it wasn't enough to get the lead before the first corner as that fell to Lionel Abbott in the Saab. This is the second one-hour endurance race with two drivers, and this race is at Thruxton in Hampshire, which is an airfield during the week but is a race circuit at weekends. The aeroplanes take off in the middle of the track, the cars go round them. There are two chicanes. Now, a chicane is put in to slow you down when it was a fast corner or a fast straight, and you have a quick left, right, left. The first of these is named after the three great British land speed record holders, Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave. The second one doesn't really have a name, it's just sort of ooh, ah, eek, and out of it. Anyway, let's have a look at what's happening on the track. The car's supposed to be a long distance race, but they always treat it as a sprint race for 1 hour. Gaten Rumbolt's Howitt here, having to start from the back, was having problems with the handling of his car. He's come up to the chicane and you can see him going sideways and out of the action. He'd come past about 20 cars and lost it all again and went straight to the back. Now, Gaten was about to be partnered today by John Meal, as he was driving a Suzuki Swift in the Class C, and he was going to drive Gaten's car in Class A. So he was jumping from 1300cc to a full turbocharged Cosworth at the front. We'll see what happens later on. So whilst the green Cosworth was getting back onto the track, Lionel Abbott was still leading at the head of the field. Now here we were Gaten again, and he's trying at the long right-hand bend, but he's using the grass bit. He thought he was into autocross. Tried the track, that didn't work, so he went to the grass on the inside. So he's about to start again at the back for the second time in this race. About to enter the chicane on two wheels is Tony Lanfranchi, also about to take the lead of Class B from Mike Devine in the Volkswagen Golf GTI. This is probably the oldest car in Class B in this race. Other cars worth noting in this class is Bill Stillwell's Fiat Tipo. It's certainly fiating in well with the Volkswagen and Astras. Looking at second place in the race is the Porsche and the Mercedes. The Porsche of Paul Edwards and the Mercedes of Alistair Davison about to perform a ram raid through the centre of the chicane and handing on a plate. Third place to Terry Pudwell, and fourth and fifth going through. Sixth, he's lost 4 positions and he's still parked in the centre of the chicane. Leading the field is Lionel Abbott in the Saab 16-valve turbo, but we have an incident out the back of the circuit as Emma Boswell slides sideways in the Suzuki Swift GTI, collects Tony Lanfranchi and then Mike Devine. Tony and Mike were battling for second place in the class, and Emma was way back in Class C. She's lost the car in this long bend, which is a very dangerous bend. If you lift off, the back will come round, and unfortunately Tony Lanfranchi was there at the moment and Mike Devine, and they've both damaged their cars very badly, as the Volkswagen Golf GTI of Terry Flatt and Austin Metcalf has not got the chicane quite right, but should concentrate on his driving, because it looks as though Mike Devine and Tony Lanfranchi are going to be out of the race. Emma Boswell returns to the pit with the front end of the Suzuki Swift dearranged. That was Tony Lanfranchi at the front and Mike at the back, as Lanfranchi is about to enter the pits with his tail up, and his mechanics will be disrupted from their T-brake as it's an unexpected pit stop. At the head of Class C is Anybody and Everybody, as the green Suzuki Swift GTI of BBC TV Top Gear presenter Tiffany Dell is coming under pressure from Rod Adlington. Rod has won the last round of this championship and is making his mark felt against the Bill Stillwell Suzuki Swift, which won the first 2 races. Now there we see Chris Lord, well, not Chris Lord completely, it's one of his wheels going across the grass, and it's the front near side wheel that's come off, as Alistair Davison is making another mistake at the chicane, but on the outside this time and using the Armco barriers instead of a Porsche. Gaten Rumbolt's Howitt, the car is smoking and he's trying to get rid of the smoke so as he can see the gauges, and you can watch the oil pressure gauge, which seems to be falling very quickly. Mike Devine, his car is having some trouble with the steering after the incident with Emma Boswell. He's about to lose the lead of Class B and retire to the pits with the Mark II Suzuki Swift GTI version of the Quinn brothers. Remember Tony Quinn? He was the one who had a different line for all the corners to every other driver. He's now got a different line for the chicane as he loses out to the Rod Adlington and the Tiffany Dell battle for 3rd and 4th in the class. And now for a little surprise. The Saab has retired. It had fuel pump problems and was misfiring the lap before and couldn't quite make it to the pits, and has retired just before the chicane. If it had got to the pits, they may have been able to repair it and get it back into the race, and with its power, it should have got back into the lead. But in the lead at the moment is Terry Pudwell, coming under pressure from Steve Papworth. Papworth carries a headlight camera, and we can see that Pudwell is indicating to go into the pits to change over the drivers. Papworth is following him in, so first and second places in the race are in the pits. Now who will come out first? It's up to the mechanics, and it's Papworth. Papworth goes into the race in first place. Pudwell joins just behind him. And in third place we have the BMW of Frank Kundle. But here comes Papworth through the chicane for the first time in the lead of the race as he exits the chicane towards the pits, and that's not the normal angle for the pits we should see, as he loses the car out of the chicane and into the barriers. That was a very heavy thump on the offside front and the wheel looks as if it's twisted, and the bodywork's certainly down on it. As the Fiesta, taking up the Quinn's notepad on lines through the chicane, retires to the inside of the chicane and can't restart the car. Now, he was in the lead when he spun it out. So who's in the lead at the moment? Is Brett Darrell? No, he's coming up upon Chaz Heil, who's about to lap the Baker from Wentworth, and he spins him out of the race because he was in the way. And Brett Darrell was saying, don't do that again. As Terry Pudwell is about to join the Thruxton Chicane Formation dancing team and loses out the first place. Because also unseen by the camera, he spun out the back and Frank Cundell came through into the lead. As Osborne joins the formation dancing team, everybody wants to get in on the act today. You would have thought after an hour's driving, these drivers should know the way through the chicane. So the Thruxton race falls to Frank Cundell in the red and white Ace Hire sponsored BMW. The Class B falls to Terry Flatt and Austin Metcalf in the Volkswagen Golf GTI, and Class C is still under dispute up until the line where it falls to Rod Adlington and Phil White in the Suzuki Swift GTI, just ahead of Brett Darrell and Tony Quinn from Bill Stillwell and Danny Stillwell. 1 week later we travelled up north again to Donington Park in Derbyshire, where we were on the Grand Prix circuit. And talking about Grand Prix, it's soon to host its first Grand Prix since the 1930s, 1938 to be precise. But 1 week's distance between the Thruxton race and this race, and remember Thruxton was a 1 hour, doesn't leave many drivers much time to get their cars repaired. Chris Lord here, remember, his wheel came off, so he had to bolt that back on and check the wheel bearings. We had the Suzuki Swift GTI of Chaz Heil, where in practice he damaged the door and the rear wheel bearing fell off, so that had to be rebuilt. And the Mercedes went into the barriers. But anyway, let's have a look at the race as it proceeds. It's Tom Seagrove in the black 944 leading the race from the Porsche 911 of Paul Edwards, and then the Saab. The Saab got its fuel pump fixed. In fifth place is Steve Papworth. Remember, he clouted the barriers very heavily at the entrance to the pits. He had to bash the wheels out, bash the door out and respray it. Paul Edwards there has just been demoted to third place by the Saab as we come up to the right-hander just before the pits. Looking back from the Alan Hassel car, Alan Hassel carries an onboard camera, and it's the smallest camera that we have available to us. It's the size of a cigarette packet. There's no way of fixing it properly, so it has to be glued to the panel. Now Paul Edwards has got back in front of the Saab again. So it's Tom Seagrove Porsche, Paul Edwards Porsche, and Saab third, Lionel Abbott. Class B being led by Mike Devine, Tony Lanfranchi's being pushed behind the Alan Hassel Sierra Cosworth, and just out to the right there you saw the Jim Smith Ford Escort RS2000 out on the rumble strips. Why are they called rumble strips? Well, when you get up close to them, you'll see that they're raised half an inch and then they drop half an inch and then raise again half an inch. So as you go over them in a tyre, you get this terrible rumble through the car. The Saab, it's got back past Paul Edwards and Tom Seagrove. He's come up alongside Tom Seagrove as they go under the Dunlop Bridge down to start the left-hander into the Melbourne Loop. This is the Grand Prix part of the circuit that's added on for the long distance races. It's a left-hand hop over the curbs, then a right-hand hop over the curbs. And then you crest the brow of the hill and drop down to a right-hand first gear hairpin. And you climb again where we used to see the old Mercedes in the Grand Prix days leaping off the ground. As Tom Seagrove in the Porsche slides it sideways and loses second place, touches the side of Paul Edwards, and Frank Cundell, the winner of last week's race, comes through in second place, just ahead of Steve Papworth as Tom Seagrove continues in fifth place, losing out 3 places. Looking back to Chris Lord now from Alan Hassel's car through the right hand onto the Melbourne Loop as Chris Lord gets very close, and Alan Hassel, he's lost him. No, there he is, right behind him still, and just behind Chris Lord is the leading Class B car of Mike Devine. There we are. Thanks for getting out of the way, Chris. Mike Devine lost out last week when he hit Emma Boswell and the suspension got twisted. But now he's back, stamping his authority on the lead of Class B. But Chris Lord seems to be getting in his way, and Tony Lanfranchi's not too far behind him. Up to the left-hander, just behind the pits. Alan Hassel goes into it, breaking down to second gear. Chris Lord's about to change paint with the back end of Alan's car. He can't get much closer as they go past the start and finish line. And Terry Pudwell's just ahead of Alan Hassel, then Chris Lord, and coming down the Craner curves, it's Stephen Belle, who's got a tank slapper of a slide as he goes left and right, and he's put a lot of dust on the track. And who's coming through next? We're about to see the leader of Class C. It's Gareth Downing in the Ford Fiesta. This was given to him as a 21st birthday present, as Rod Adlington, the turkey farmer from Birmingham, is out on a wild goose chase on the grass, but gets back on the track before the left-hander at McLean's. Now we're looking ahead from Steve Patworth's car as he spins it away just before the entrance to the pits again for the second week running. The car smoking heavily, more like his cigar that he carries around the paddock all day. And he joins after losing 2 positions. But look what happens at the bottom of Craner Curves as Christian Van, for the second time this year, newcomer to the championship, turns the car over in the kitty litter, or gravel trap as it's called. And Christian will go and speak nicely to his father because his father's paint company sponsors the car in the championship this year. Looking from Tom Seagrew's car as he's got back on the track behind Chris Lord and Terry Pudwell down to the right-hander at Redgate. They're going in 3 abreast, but you will have to notice that there's only 1 line out of it as they join in a train formation on the exit. Lord ahead of Pudwell, ahead of Seagrew, but Lionel Abbott comes through to take the checkered flag. Class B honours fell to Mike Devine and Class C fell to Gareth Downing. So the points after round 6 is Rod Adlington leading from Class C with 39 points, just ahead of Lionel Abbott Class A with 38, Mike Devine Class B with 37 and Danny Stillwell Class C with 32. Let's go back down to Pembrey in Wales for the next round, which was just an ordinary sprint race, 1 driver. The Saab of Lionel Abbott in the lead as they drag up to the hairpin, but Mike Devine on the outside of the front row. Why, do you ask? Well, it was wet in practice, and when it's wet, the smaller front-wheel drive cars handle a lot better than the bigger cars, and therefore the power advantage isn't there. It can also be seen by the way that Gareth Downing in the Ford Fiesta and Rod Adlington in the red and white Suzuki Swift are way up amongst the Class A and Class B cars. At the head of the field, though, it's Lionel Abbott in the Saab Turbo, but just behind him it's Mike Devine, leader of Class B in the Volkswagen Golf, and there's a black car that you might not identify up amongst the leaders. That's the Class B car of Tony Mould. It's a Honda Civic VTEC. This car and its sister car dominated the championship last year in Class B in the hands of Piers Johnson and Dave Cox, but they haven't appeared this year as Dave Cox and Piers Johnson have moved up to another championship and there wasn't enough money to run them. But now Tony Mould and Tim Hood have purchased these cars and are running them in the championship this year. This is their second race, and Tim Hood has certainly got it going up amongst the leaders. Here he is, pressurising Chris Lord up to the chicane. He's up the inside, but Chris Lord didn't see him, and they've now touched, and it was side and front impact. Chris Lord has damaged the car, his bumpers all come off, so he's about to retire to the side of the track, but Tim Hood's gone on. He will now get off. He should be able to remove the bumper and continue the race without the bumper. Let's have a look. We're looking from Tim Hood's car as he dives to the inside line, but Chris Lord came over on him. There wasn't enough room. They made contact, and this corner is notorious for this sort of incident. But already up amongst the tail enders of Class C is Lionel Abbott in the Saab. Just going past the Danny Stillwell car. He's already lapped the Christian Van Suzuki Swift. And Tom Seagrew coming through the field now, just ahead of Mike Devine in second place. He had to start at the back of the field, as in practice there was an incident when Paul Edwards wrote his 911 Porsche off, and under a yellow flag he was seen to overtake, and this demoted him to start at the back of the field. Barry Pearson coming through the hairpin, sliding the back end round. This car's not handling very well today in the wet conditions. But Lionel Abbott has got it all together as he takes another win on the checkered flag. And on the podium from left to right, it's Gareth Downing, Lionel Abbott and Mike Devine. Straight across country to Brands Hatch, and we end up with an incident-packed wet race. The cars came out and the conditions were wonderful. But when they formed up on the grid, the heavens opened up and the rains fell down, and the cars didn't have their correct tyres on. And when I mean correct tyres, in dry conditions they run on heavily worn tyres, almost bald, and in wet conditions they run on new tyres. Well, they're all on the dry tyres, and you can see what happened. Rod Adlington's just gone off into the gravel trap. We're coming up to Druids Hill Bend. Remember, Mike Devine, great car control, but look, he's already in the gravel trap to the left as Stephen Belle, his teammate, is about to join him. Mike's over on the far left. Stephen managed to get back on the track. Tim Hood, we're coming down Druids Hill Bend, and Tim's got a problem as the car starts going from left to right, and he's every which way but loose as he manages to collect it just before he gets into the Graham Hill Bend. It's Frank Cundall leading from the Saab of Lionel Abbott as they're about to go out in the country. And what happens in the middle of the pack? Let's have a look from Bill Stillwell's car. There's Tom Seagrew facing the wrong way. Bill takes to the left, just touches the car of Alan Hassel as he continues, but looking at Tom Seagrew, Gareth Downing's gone off to the left, followed by Gary James, and Stephen Bell's just gone back through. He went off at Druids Hill. Now we're looking from Chaz Harl's car through the right-hander out in the back, and just ahead of them you see Tony Mould going off to the right-hand side into the barriers. Francine Boggs ahead, and there's the red flag. Now the red flag comes out all the way around the circuit, and this means the race is stopped. And we can see why, because there's Rod Adlington off, Mike Devine, Tom Seagrew, Gary James. So they formed up again on the grid. The conditions started to dry, but when the lights changed to green, it started raining again. And it was Frank Cundell into the lead, just ahead of the Saab of Lionel Abbott as they went up into Paddock Hill Bend. Perched on the shoulder of Gareth Downing in the Ford Fiesta XR2, we can see what the conditions are like again as the spray is coming off the tyres through Paddock Bend. The brake lights come on. Normally they wouldn't be on as they come through here in the dry, but it's up to Druids, and who's gone off? It's Tony Quinn gone off. Ian Dudman in the Vauxhall Astra has gone off trying to avoid him as the Jaguar at the back is about to catch the cars up. They're up into Druids Hill, and on the inside it's Steve Papworth in the red and white Sierra Cosworth gone off. Just ahead of Tim Hood, there's Mark Dan in the Sapphire Cosworth going off. Down the bottom, and it's Danny Stillwell gone off to the left in the Suzuki Swift as all the cars have rejoined the race through Graham Hill Bend up into Kidney, and it's Steve Papworth rejoining from Druids. Now we go out into the country and see what's happening. It's dry. From Tim Hood's car we can see Bill Stillwell bouncing over the curbs, flat out there, through Dingledale, up to the left-hander, and here comes the rain again. The track's getting damper, the conditions are very false, you're not sure what part of the track you should be driving on, and Bill Stillwell goes off to the right. Under the bridge we're coming into clearways, and you can see the plumes of spray coming off the track again as we reach the rain-contained area, past the start and finish line, and it's heavy rain now as Abbott's leading in the Saab, just ahead of Frank Cundell in the BMW, and then Terry Pudwell in the Ford Cosworth. Through Paddock, the cars are streaming past the pits. They can hardly see their pit signals. And on the left we can see a green flag. Now a green flag is a flag after an incident. So there's an incident at the top of Paddock. The yellow flags will be out up there as Tim Hood loses it and goes sideways. And there's the incident. Tony Lanfranchi in the Vauxhall Astra has hit the barriers and turned the car onto its side. Don't worry, the car's not on fire. That's called the dieseling effect. When you switch off, it's oil going through the engine. Now, will they stop the race as the car's in a very precarious area and very close to the track? The door opens, Tony's about to get out, so he's quite okay. But the extra weight of Tony on the roof has turned the car completely over. You can hear the sirens going from the safety vehicles as they get on the track, and there's the red flag for the second time. I told you it's an incident-packed race. There at the bottom of Paddock is Jim Morris in his Volkswagen Golf, gone off into the gravel trap, but he'll be rescued again as Tony Lanfranchi returns to the pits, and his car will not be able to restart because it'll be too badly damaged. So, for the third restart, and the track's dry, but look at the lens, and what's the cameraman singing? It's raindrops keep falling on my lens, as we're about to start for the third time. The same front row of the grid, but a few patches where cars have gone off and not been able to rejoin, as it's Frank Cundell side by side now with Lionel Abbott as they go up into Paddock Hill. We're looking for the camera of Steve Papworth. Mark Dan's rejoined and he's in his front position. He's in fourth place. Barry Pearson's up there. Terry Pudwell up into Druids, and the rain's really falling down now as Cundell and Barry Pearson have touched. They've gone into the gravel trap through Druids, and there's a big gap now between Lionel Abbott and the second place man of Mark Dan, just ahead of Terry Pudwell, Tom Seagrew. Will the race continue under these conditions? There's two cars off at Druids. Let's see how many more go off before the race is stopped. Out into the country, nobody else has spun at the moment. All the cars are through Graham Hill Bend, out into the country. Now the rain's really coming down as the wipers on Tibbs Hood's car is trying to keep the rain off the screen as they're going through Dingledale, which is the quick flick, right, left, right. Jim Smith just ahead in the Ford Escort RS2000 is coming back onto the club part of the track. The long drag down to clearways under the bridge and on the club part of the circuit, and the rain's very heavy now as Tom Seagrew tries to take Pudwell on the inside. Chris Lord up alongside George Agerton through clearways. The Class B cars and C cars are getting mixed up amongst the Cosworths now with the rain falling down. Past the start and finish line, up into Paddock Hill for the start of the second lap. And there's an incident as Gerard Mason in the Team Mason Motorsport Suzuki Swift goes sideways in clearways, but continues as we come round Paddock. We can see the cars from Druids looking back at Paddock, coming through, and they're going wide. There was Danny Stillwell going off wide. Looking from Chaz Hall's car at Carol Miles. Carol Miles just ahead in the Mark II Suzuki Swift as Jim Morris has gone off again and Tony Quinn's gone off and he's just touched him and gone into the gravel trap. What's about to happen now? There's Carol Miles and she hits Jim Smith's car and bounces onto the bonnet of Tony Quinn as Chaz Hall stops and doesn't touch them. Jim Morris's car gets pushed back into the gravel. Tony Quinn's out, Jim Morris is out, but where's Carol? Her car's very badly deranged, sitting on the bonnet of Quinn's, as you can see it up in the air. The marshal's there looking at Carol, checking to see if she's okay. No, they're stopping the race. He's saying it's not safe to continue, and the race was stopped at that point and was declared a non-event with no points being awarded. Next we went to Thruxton, and guess what? It's raining again. Look at the plumes of spray coming off the cars, but this time they're on the right tyres for the right race. So, at the head of the field, it's Lionel Abbott in the Saab, just ahead of Terry Pudwell, but Mike Devine's up there with his little Volkswagen Golf GTI. So, let's see what's happening out in the back, and in the long right-hand bend at Thruxton, in these conditions, there's no way you can hold it flat in fourth. You've got to lift off and feather it through the bends. Tim Hood's a fine example in the Honda Civic VTEC. This car is very nimble, but very, very twitchy in these sort of conditions. And you can see the steering wheel is being feathered through his hands, through the right-hander. At the head of field, it's Lionel Abbott just ahead of Terry Pudwell. In third place is the Volkswagen of Mike Devine. Frank Cundell in the BMW ahead of Alan Hassel. Then it's Barry Pearson in the battle-scarred Sapphire Cosworth. This car was heavily damaged in practice. Practice conditions were not as damp as this, but they were greasy. So the cars, there was quite a few off into the gravel traps and quite a bit of damage in practice, which is quite an expense for most of these drivers. None of them are actually work-supported drivers. They all have a weekday job and at weekends run their little cars. Most of them don't have major sponsorship, so they're having to fork out for these cars out of their own pockets. One of the other problems in practice and in the race is the cars actually misting up inside. Now I know they've got demisters, but they have to turn them down because that takes power away from the engine. And the cars easily mist up and they're having difficulty seeing. Although the way some of these drivers drive, you think they were using that as an excuse. Frank Cundell bouncing it over the curb in third place, looking for the fourth place car, which is Mike Devine, well ahead in Class B. You can't even see the second guy. Gerard Mason in the Team Mason Sports Suzuki Swift, about to be lapped by the Class A cars. Chaz Hall being lapped by Steve Papworth. The Mercedes-Benz of Alistair Davison, rebuilt after its incident here against the Armco. Barry Pearson, there's George Agerton, Jim Smith in the RS2000 behind him. As Davison goes through, lights ablaze with Tom Seagrew. David Weir just behind them in the Sapphire Cosworth. Ian Dudman loses it in the chicane. We thought nobody would lose it in the chicane today, but it's Craven Jones who's trapped behind him as Osborne goes through in the Vauxhall Astra. Now, is it after you or after me? No, after you, and boom, oh, he touches him. But it's Craven Jones now got ahead of Ian Dudman. As will he continue? He's trying to get the car going. Looking from Tim Hood's car. Just ahead is Bill Stillwell bouncing the Fiat round the back. George Agerton off on the grass. Now, George has been a good boy for the last few races, but he's about to appear again. So we'll see what incidents happen. But Tom Seagrew, he's spun at the chicane. The chicane is causing the problem again. He's about to continue in 6th place. He's lost about 4 places. Bill Stillwell, Class B, going round his outside, blocking Tim Hood just behind him. George Agerton, then Tony Lanfranchi way back. David Weir from Steve Papworth, Alan Hassel. Then we have Alistair Davison in the Mercedes, with just ahead of Barry Pearson in the red Sapphire. But then it's Class B. Second is Jim Smith, Tim Hood. Bill Stillwell up the inside. Tony Lanfranchi dropping in behind Bill Stillwell. Remember, Mike Devine has gone off way into the distance in the lead of Class B. Leading the race overall, though, is the Essex boy Lionel Abbott in the Saab, just ahead of Terry Pudwell, as he takes the checkered flag for another win. 4th overall and first in Class B, waving to the camera, is Mike Devine in the Volkswagen Golf GTI. A long time before we see second in the class. And second in Class B will be Jim Smith in the Ford Escort RS2000, just ahead of the curb-hopping Tim Hood. Then George Agerton, before we see 4th in the class, which was Bill Stillwell, ahead of Tony Lanfranchi. Bill in the Fiat Tipo with the yellow bonnet, and Tony Lanfranchi with the red and yellow checkered bonnet. Leader of Class C is Rod Adlington in the Suzuki Swift GTI, and he lapped his fellow competitors in the Class C. Gerard Mason coming through in about 6th place. There's the Garland winners. Rod Adlington on the right, Mike Devine in the centre and Lionel Abbott on the left. The long, the short and the tall of it. The next round was to be held at Snetterton. Snetterton's up in Norfolk, next to the A11, just before you get to Norwich, between Thetford and Norwich. Looking for Barry Pearson's car at the start, the red Sapphire Cosworth, he was trying to find a gap to get through, but there was Tom Seager in the Porsche and they touched side by side. Looking back from Alan Hassel's car, we see the sister car of the Alan Hassel Motorsport team of Malcolm Johnson. The cars told apart by the colour of their headlights. Alan's is yellow and Malcolm's is black. That's the easiest way to do it. Round through the right-hander, out into the long Norwich straight, Jim Smith comes into view, wants to get his Furrows of Telford sponsored RS2000 onto the camera. With Gareth Downing, we're about to go through the right-hander to enter the long, daunting Norwich straight, where the cars are flat out. Danny Stillwell didn't want this, as he wanted Gareth out the way so as he could have an easy win, so Gareth goes off into the fields to do some ploughing. Perhaps he should have had the Furrows of Telford sponsored car. Up into the left-hander at the end of the Norwich straight. It's a very quick left-hand bend, but you soon enter a very tight right-hand hairpin. The brave boys braking at the hairpins, the others braking before the left-hander. And this is the only circuit in England to boast and host the 24-hour race for saloon cars. And at night time you can often see the brake disc glowing through the wheels as they brake into the hairpin. Out of the second hairpin, Tom Seagrove spins it away. He's becoming a bit of an expert now at spinning the car and quickly getting it back onto the track. You can hear the wheels spinning as they go off into the distance. Mike Devine's well ahead of his Class B competitors again, leaving the others in his wake. But where's the Saab? The Saab's not at the head of the field, it's in third place, and this is going to be an upset for Lionel. The two Benfield Motorsport Sapphire Cosworths of Mark Dan and Chris Lord in practice were quicker than him, and in the race are ahead of him in first and second place. Lionel's in third. He won't like this and will want to get ahead of them soon. Phil White, seen here smoking the tyres, trying to take Alan Hassel through the left-hander before the hairpin, mucks it up and goes sideways and backs onto the grass. He's just bought this car from Kerry Nash and it's been laying dormant for 2 years. And the car is evidently not as rusty as the driver is. Back on the track, out of the field, is Gareth Downing. Now, he continued at the back of the Suzuki Swifts, but has made a fiasco of the Suzukis in his Fiesta, and has gone from the back of them to second in about 5 laps, and has only got Danny Stillwell just ahead of him to get the lead of Class C. Now we're looking from Steve Patworth's cars to Frank Cundell and Barry Pearson as they enter the chicane, and at Brands Hatch, just the same, they touched and have gone off into the gravel trap. Barry is extracting himself, but Frank is already out of it and is continuing. But as Barry comes round, if you look at the front wheels, you will see they're not pointing in the same direction. They're both pointing inwards. This is called toe-in, except it's a little bit too much for this car. Barry will retire to the pits. Just before Barry joined then, you saw Rod Adlington at the back of the field. He was playing with the car this week, and the turkey farmer from Birmingham couldn't make head nor tail of the book and said it was all gobbledygook. That's why he was at the back of Class C. Lionel Abbott's now turned the power on in the Saab, and he's gone past Chris Lord down, and has only got Dan in front of him, who's desperate for a win. What will happen when we get to the flag? Looking from Chris Lord, you can see Lionel turning the power on, trying to get on terms with Mark, and he's pulling away slowly from Chris Lord through the long right-hander at the S's. But Mark Dan comes through to take the checkered flag for his first win of the season, but it wasn't to last very long, because in post-race scrutineering, that's where the cars are checked after the race to see if they're legal, he was found to be underweight and was penalised for this, and the win went to Lionel Abbott in the Saab. Danny Stillwell came through in the Suzuki Swift to take Class C, and Mike Devine, of course, he came through in Class B to take its honours. Mark Dan smiling and in a happy mood for his win, but is soon to change the picture on his face when he hears the result of post-race scrutineering. Mike Devine, he's happy with his win and keeps his championship hopes alive, as we're about to see in a minute. And Danny Stillwell from Essex, soon to be stricken down by the dreaded German measles. Lionel Abbott's leading now from Mike Devine, Rod Adlington dropping to third, and Danny Stillwell in fourth. 2 rounds left, 20 points to earn, all 4 can still win the championship. Let's see what happens at the penultimate round for Thruxton. And Thruxton, yes, it's another wet day. It was a bit damp and slippery in practice and a few cars went off. and Mark Dan decided to try and rearrange the Armco on the exit for the start and finish line in the white and yellow Sapphire, but they managed to panel beat it during practice, between practice and the race, and they've had to run it without a rear window. So at the start we see a little bit of nudging and nerfing as we go up to the complex of Campbell Cobb and Seagrave, the wipers having to be on because there's a hell of a lot of spray coming off of the road, as it's still the Saab of Lionel Abbott in the lead just ahead of Papworth and Terry Pudwell in the Sapphire Cosworth. The Class B is between Mike Devine and Tony Lanfranchi as they come up to the chicane for the first time. It's still the Saab, followed by Terry Pudwell, then Steve Papworth. Mark Dan in the windowless Cosworth, followed by Chris Lord, Mike Devine just ahead of Tom Seagrove, then Austin Metcalf, Tony Lanfranchi heading the Class B. Class C was down to Stillwell from Adlington, just ahead of Gareth Downing in the Fiesta. The car's behaving himself this week, but some things went wrong with the drivers in the wet, and the first to show was Tom Seagrove getting it wrong on the exit for the chicane and going to the back of the field right behind the Suzuki Swifts before he got the gear engaged and brain and headed off to get the pack. But at the head of the pack was Lionel Abbott, still in the Saab, revelling in the wet conditions, ahead of Terry Pudwell, being closely followed by Steve Papworth. Mike Devine heading Class B was being harried by Austin Metcalf, with Tony Lanfranchi just ahead of Malcolm Johnson in the second Alan Hassel Cosworth. Class C, well, that was Bill Stillwell, and Bill was deputising for his brother Danny, who I told you had got the dreaded lurgy this week, and he's giving Rod Adlington hell this week in the wet conditions, revelling in it and not driving his Fiat Tipo. Mark Dan, he was getting in the way of Mike Devine, who wanted to put some distance between himself and Austin Metcalf, second in the class, and in the wet conditions was easily pulling away from Austin. Rod Adlington was trying all the lines he knew and some of the lines he shouldn't know to get ahead of Bill Stillwell. Now Bill was in the car to try and keep his brother's hopes alive to head Class C at the final round. Rod Adlington didn't want it that way and wanted to get in front of Bill to keep his championship's hopes alive and try and win the championship overall. So everything to go for. Mike Devine still giving everything he's got between these three Cosworths. He was getting in their way, or were they getting in his way? But it's still at the head of the field. It was Lionel Abbott in the Saab. In Class C, Chaz Hyle was having handling problems and dropping back from 4th place to 7th behind Mike Moore and Gerard Mason. And Chaz, being a baker, is not sure whether he should dish up a small twist or a large twist in this manoeuvre, as he's getting in a bit of a pickle. Soon to get back on the track again, into first gear, and off he goes. The wrong way up the track, but now the right way. As Mike Devine shows the Sapphires a little way through the chicane, he's pulling away from them now and showing his heels, as Malcolm Johnson's not giving in and sliding the back out on oversteer from the chicane. Looking now from the car of Ian Dudman, Barry Pearson's just come up in the Sapphire Cosworth to put himself between Tony Lanfranchi and Ian into the chicane, and just behind Ian is Richard Craven-Jones in a similar Vauxhall Astra. So the Astra's now bunching up for a converted attack as Tony Lanfranchi does the Rod Adlington school of driving across the grass, but can actually lay claim to it as he was driving it before Rod was born 30 years ago. Bill Stillwell now into complex with Rod Adlington up his side, on the grass, off the grass. He's got ahead of him, so it's Rod Adlington in the lead of Class C. Back to the notorious chicane for another spin, and it's Ian Dudman this time, allowing Tony Lanfranchi to come through, which Tony allowed Ian on the previous lap. But he's about to let Craven-Jones come through in the red Vauxhall Astra. Over the shoulder of Chaz Hyle, we see into the distance George Agerton in the number 13 Sapphire Cosworth. George Agerton about to show us that the bends have no problems for him. It's just straight and watch the mechanics behind the pit wall bobbing up and down like two little ducks. Now George parks the car on the track and the engine stalls. What you should do now is try and start the car. If not, you should get out, jump over the pit wall and leave it for the flag marshals to warn the other cars of the incident that has happened. Ah, forgot to tell you, this is George. As the Vauxhall Astras of Lanfranchi, Craven-Jones and Ian Dudman go past the start and finish line, what's happening to George? He's checking to see that all four wheels are still on the floor, and he's decided that it should go again if he can get a push. So, two mechanics jump over the pit wall to give him a hand and try and push start the car. If this was a Formula One race, he'd be disqualified immediately. So he jumps back in the car and will restart it and continue, but he will finish last as he's been lapped twice. The puff of smoke will signify that the car has started, and will continue on its way as the two mechanics get back over the pit wall. It's Lionel Abbott in the Saab, lights ablaze, wipers going, coming round to collect the checkered flag on the penultimate round of the championship. Class B, that's going to fall to Mike Devine, who's put himself well ahead now of the Sapphire Cosworths, who are fighting to get on terms with him. And you can see the back screen missing of Mark Dan as he goes to the line. But who's it for Class C? Is it Stillwell or Adlington? Yes, it's Bill Stillwell. Has Rod given up? Maybe not, as Rod must curb his enthusiasm in the race to the flag. It's Bill Stillwell to take the flag and gain the points for his brother, keeping Rod at bay and Danny's hope still alive for the class win. Bill is the one in the red overalls on the right-hand side. The other two you should know quite well by now, Mike Devine and Lionel Abbott. The final round, Donington Park up in Derbyshire, and the conditions are dry but very cold. There was a lot of problems in practice and we lost a lot of cars. Bill Stillwell's car got ridden off along the pit wall, Chaz Harle's car got turned over out the back, and a few other cars sustained damage, but they've repaired them and got onto the grid. You are now about to see the final round of the 1992 BARC Production Car Championship, and you will soon see who the champion was to be. It could be Lionel Abbott in the Saab, or it could be Mike Devine in the Volkswagen Golf. Because, as you have just seen at the last round at Thruxton, it was Bill Stillwell who beat Rod Adlington, thus taking Rod Adlington out of the championship hopes. But Rod can still win the class championship. So can Danny in Class C. Class B is the champion of Mike Devine, and Class A is Lionel Abbott in the Saab, coming down the Craner curves. But who will be the overall champion? Lionel or Mike? Let's sit back and watch. As through Craner curves down to the old hairpin, the Saab leads the pack from Seagrew's Porsche, Papworth, Cosworth, the White Brothers Cosworth, Lord, Pearson, and look, it's Danny Stillwell and Rod Adlington having a nose-to-nose as they come through the Craner. The front end of Danny's car is badly damaged and Rod's gone off into the distance. Has Danny's hopes been dashed? This and much more will soon be revealed as we go up into McLean's. Behind the wheel of Terry Flatt, off to the left has gone Mike Moore in the Suzuki Swift, almost followed by Chris Osborne. Sitting in the headlight of Steve Papworth, we're about to do the right and left chicane just before the start and finish line. George Agerton goes through, over the curb as Steve follows him. Through the left-hander, foot down, power on as they come to the start and finish line. It's too much power for Steve as he's spun it away and gone into the wall. That was a very heavy back impact and a side slide along the wall, scratching the paint, which will have to be repainted for next year's Grand Prix. But let's have a look again from the outside. Steve Papworth in the red and white car just in the background goes sideways across to the track, backwards into the wall. The spoiler comes off and bounces over the car as the car slides along the wall. Second through Redgate has gone the Porsche, and now we have a necklace of sapphires, headed by the White Brothers, followed by Barry Pearson, Chris Lord, and then George Agerton. Pushed off to the left was the White Brothers silver and blue one, and just ahead of George Agerton before they go down the Craner curves. At the bottom of the Craner curves, there's Tony Mould in the Honda Civic VTEC as he bounces over the curbs and into the dust, about to join the fray just ahead of our camera car of Austin Metcalf and Terry Flatt. This is not Austin's normal mount because, unseen to the camera at the last round at Thruxton, he rolled it into the grass and damaged the shell beyond repair. Side by side, door handle to door handle, wheel arch to wheel arch, into the chicane before the start and finish line. It's the Ford RS2000 of Jim Smith, giving no quarter to the Volkswagen Golf GTI of Stephen Belle. Past the start and finish line as Terry Flatt now pulls up alongside. Looking back from the Sierra Cosworth of Malcolm Johnson, who's about to go into the pits to do his driver changeover. We're about to witness the indecisive pits entry of Michael White in the Sapphire Cosworth, belonging to his brother, who will have a lot of talking to do when he sees what's happened to the back end. Michael retires the car at Redgate Lodge, and you can see that it's got a very squashed rear end. The Divine Volkswagen Golf GTI about to come in, and it's Sean Andrews handing over to Mike. The car still in the lead of the class, still in the championship race, as he's about to hot-foot it out of the pits, still hoping for that championship win. Lionel Abbott just gets out of the car, hands it over to Chris Goodwin, and his hopes are with Chris to bring the car home in first place with the fastest lap, and he will have the championship, and Mike Devine will have no claim on it. Into Redgate, just side by side with Tony Lanfranchi, as Mark Dan shows that you can get a lot of oversteer from a Sapphire Cosworth with superb car control as he exits the start and finish chicane. But on the other hand, this is not superb car control, as Steve Osborne has a moment coming down the Craner curves and into the old hairpin, but collects it just in time. One man without a spin today is Tom Seagrew, who's got it together at long last and is finishing in second place in the class, just ahead of Frank Cundall and the BMW, who won't give up all the way to the checkered flag. With the retirements of Danny Stillwell and Rod Adlington, Mike Moore and Tim Busby got it together in the Suzuki Swift, sponsored by Kenwood, and won the Class C. But winning the race overall and Class A was Lionel Abbott and Chris Goodwin in the Saab Turbo 16 valve. Mike Devine and Sean Andrews won in Class B in the Volkswagen Golf GTI, and Tim Busby and Mike Moore in Class C. Chris Goodwin, who helped Lionel Abbott to the championship, receives the garland for the race win. So after 12 gruelling rounds of the BARC Production Car Championship, it was Lionel Abbott with 86 from Mike Devine Class B with 81, Rod Adlington 61 from Class C, and Danny Stillwell with 52 from Class